this on the surface I look fine. My brain feels heavy, my traumatized mind. And I'm so tired, I can't feel my eyes. Whoa, whoa. I'm petty, but I know how to lie. I feel feelings that I can't describe. I'm not breathing, but I'm still alive. Whoa, whoa.
Shout out to Neoliberal Tears for this.
Shout out to Twitter/X user Neoliberal Tears for resurfacing this clip.
Neoliberal Tears commented at the top of the show, "What happened to my music?" One of my favorite commenters.
Yeah, big fan.
So much affection for me.
Keep it in mind. Prepare for a holiday season of Neoliberal Tears.
Hi, I'm Neoliberal Tears, and welcome to Nightcap with Neoliberal Tears, which is who I am. Hello, thank you for joining me. So there's a lot of excitement happening. Excitement, I don't know, is maybe hope, maybe some hope that the left community is feeling now that certain democratic socialist candidates have been elected to the House of Representatives. And one of them is Melat Kiros, who's going to be a freshman Congress member. And I wanted to interrogate, as I always do, with Democratic Party candidates. There are no Republicans who support this. That's why they are excluded from this rigorous testing that I'm putting candidates through, to see if she supports my litmus test, which is the one-state solution, equal rights from the river to the sea, and the right of return of all Palestinian refugees and their descendants, so that she joins my president, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, and incoming freshman Congressmember Chris Rabb, who happens to also support the one-state solution. So let's find out together, shall we? This is an interview that incoming Congressmember Kiros did with a local news station in Colorado, in the district she represents. So let's see if we can glean some insights into whether she will support our cause.
You've said that the October 7th massacre of Israeli civilians by Hamas fighters was the, quote, inevitable consequence of apartheid. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah. I think identifying what's happened over the course of these events in Israel and Palestine as inevitable doesn't take away the horror and the tragedy from what's taken place, from the innocent loss of life in Palestine and in Israel. My foreign policy has always been rooted in protecting the basic dignity of people, regardless of where they live, regardless of what they believe in, regardless of what race they are. And because of that true commitment to that kind of foreign policy, I believe it's incumbent upon us to actually identify why this violence is happening in the first place, and to understand that certain conditions lead people to feeling like violence is their only answer. And our responsibility is to make sure that we're actually being responsive to the protest and to the resistance, the peaceful resistance that people have. From December of 2018, from March of 2018 to December of 2019, Palestinians marched peacefully almost every single Friday, asking for a reprieve from the apartheid that they were existing under.
So what she's an incredibly gifted communicator, much like the other Congress members that have been elected, like Daria Lisa Villa Chevalier. Very eloquent, very compelling. It's I think she would make a very, I guess I should say right now that I'm pretty, I find there's a lot to like with Congressmember Kiros. I think one thing I would add to is slightly is what she's referencing right now is the Great March of Return, which happened in Gaza in 2018, where thousands of Palestinians marched to the border between Gaza and the apartheid state, and they said, we were expelled from here, from what is now modern-day Israel, and we would like to return. It was the Great March of Return. They didn't simply ask for a reprieve from being in a concentration camp. They asked to return, and which is a fundamental right recognized by international law. and that which now so many groups and organizations that are Zionists or capitalists or all of the above are trying to specifically defund UNRWA or eliminate UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Agency, because they think that by closing UNRWA and defunding UNRWA, they can cancel out the right of return for Palestinian refugees, because UNRWA gives people refugee status, which they hold on to, hoping one day they get to return. There are Palestinian families who have refugee ID cards who pass it on who have been forced to pass on their refugee ID cards from generation to generation, hoping that maybe they will never see historical Palestine in their lifetime, but maybe their children will get to return one day. So I think it's really important for me when brilliant democratic socialists or whoever, congressional people with congressional status in the United States or Senate, or people who might be elected to the Senate, like Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, when they talk about the Great March of Return, I think it should be specified specifically that Palestinians in Gaza were marching for their right to return home, to return, not just to get a reprieve from apartheid. But everything else she's saying is, of course, right on the money.
And over the course of that year and a few months, over 100 Palestinians, over 100 innocent Palestinians were killed as a result of that.
Thousands of Palestinians have been shot in the leg, in the knee, in the arm. Paramedics who tried to help the people who were getting shot by snipers from far away, they were also getting killed. So it's very important, I think, to center the reason for the march, which is the right of return.
And that was tragic. And I sincerely believe that we have to heed the words of, President JFK said it himself, those who make peaceful resistance impossible make violent revolution inevitable. That's not to justify what happened. That's not to take away from the horror of it. It's to recommit ourselves to preventing the conditions that led to it in the first place.
So you've said that phrase that you use, inevitable consequence, is not justification for the attack on Israel. Is it a suggestion that Israel had it coming?
No, not at all. It's about understanding the conditions in which violence and war happens, right?
She's answering his bullshit bad faith framings of the question very eloquently, much more eloquently than I could. And I think it's enraging to me that people treat the idea of genocide, ethnic cleansing, all of these things, apartheid. There are root causes for people trying to resist apartheid and occupation and genocide. And the idea, like the interviewer has to be playing dumb here to think that Palestinians who have been in Gaza, especially, who have been in a concentration camp, unable to leave, literally imprisoned in a tiny area, which is the Gaza Strip, that has been under a blockade for more than 15 years. The idea that that's not going to lead to some reaction is insane. And the fact that he's playing stupid here and sort of saying, oh, are you saying that they had it coming, blah, blah, blah. If you just put yourself in other people's shoes, I think it's very easy to tell why things happen.
Israel is a country that has been accused of apartheid and occupation for decades now, and has been able to resist any kind of change despite all of the frustration on the world stage that people have had for the conditions that Palestinians have been living in. And I hope that as an ally that Israel claims to be, that they would be responsive to our demands to make sure that they change those conditions so that we can actually finally start to the work of peace building and delivering aid to the people in need.
Do you believe that the 9/11 terrorist attacks on America were the inevitable?
Swear to God. This is why I could never run for office, because like I would literally, I would give such a dirty look to that to that reporter. I mean, Jesus Christ. I don't know if it's like part of it is like, in mediocre white men's journalists, quote unquote, minds. Maybe they feel like, oh, I have to be adversarial to sort of prove that I'm a real journalist. Except the ways in which he chooses to be adversarial, quote unquote, is like kind of, yeah. I'm not going to dignify that with my take. Let's just fast forward to another part that I had jotted down here that can help us assess if incoming Congressmember Kiros supports the one-state solution or if she's open to it. Let's see.
On the fact that Palestinians in Israel right now do not have the constitutional right to self-determination. That is what stems all of the laws that discriminate, that create the system of apartheid that the Palestinian people are existing under right now.
And very, very interesting facts here that she's bringing up that are absolutely true and that I don't hear a lot of Congress members touch on. And I'm glad that she brought that up because of actually quite a recent law that the apartheid state passed in 2018. They specifically passed a law in the apartheid state that states that only Jewish people have the right to, quote unquote, self-determination between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. It literally specifically excludes Palestinians from citizenship. That's discriminatory by nature. That's a law that was passed. And she's saying Palestinians are being denied rights based on who they are by law. Definitionally, Israel doesn't have a constitution, and people say it's part of the problem. And I think she's already showing us that she's quite informed, and of course she is. We're gonna read more from her later on, including why she was fired from the law firm that she worked at by defending people's right to protest the legitimacy of apartheid, or the legitimacy of an entity that denies rights to people based on ethnicity or religion. So yeah, let's keep playing that.
And what I said in the letter that got me fired is what I still believe today. My hope is that we can work together to build a region where Palestinians and Israelis can live peacefully, that can live under a government that treats them all equally and ensures that each of them get to experience and enjoy the land, which does have a uniquely Muslim, uniquely Jewish, uniquely Christian character, and to do it peacefully and coexisting.
You see, this is very interesting if you really listen to the way she's framing things. I specifically, the part that I liked very much is the part where she mentioned Palestinians and Israelis living under a government that treats people equally. She is essentially saying that there should be one government for all people, right, in the region. She's gesturing, even despite the fact that this interviewer is extremely hostile, already, like from the jump, desperate to paint her as anti-Semitic or anti-people or a big blah blah blah. This white man came with with a lot of baggage and bias and all of those things, trying to catch her saying something wrong. I think she's, and I guess this is from her. We can thank her training as a lawyer for this. She's very clear, if you actually look at the language that she's using, where her values stand. So she said that the people in the region, she hopes that the people in the region can live under a government that treats them all equally, and then sort of speaks to the multi-religious, multi-ethnic nature of Palestine, which has always been the case. It's always been a land that has celebrated, and has been sacred to and important to all Abrahamic faiths and religions. Jewish people, of course, have always been a minority in Palestine, but they were treated like everybody else before the founding of the Zionist state. So I think it's safe to predict in this juncture that Congressmember Kiros is spiritually supportive of the one-state solution. We haven't heard her say it, but I think it's safe to assume that she understands the issue very, very well. So even though I veer towards cynicism when it comes to the Democratic Party, I do believe there is still an open question on whether the Democratic Party deserves to be rehabilitated at all, or to be reformed, or if it can be reformed, or if we're just going to have the rug pulled from under us, despite the excitement that we get from individual Congress members who have been elected. I think this is an extremely talented communicator, but also someone who has studied the issue very well and is very, very informed, much more informed than someone like Ayo Flippity Flop, who I think to this day still refuses to read any books on Palestine, at least from the way she presents herself and the votes she takes. This is someone who does understand exactly what's happening. And the fact that she's going into the Democratic Party is, I guess, questionable, but quite an asset to the Democratic Party if they're smart enough. This is the kinds of candidates who I think can inspire quite a few people. So I think this is someone who I'm ready to predict will join my president, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, in endorsing the one-state solution, or onto a one-state solution resolution or an anti-apartheid act, the way towards the end of the 80s. I believe it was 1989 when the anti-apartheid act was passed. I think she would join my president, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, in supporting that. So kudos to her. Let's see another moment from the interview that I wanted to highlight.
I sincerely believe that companies that profit off of war are not companies that we should seek to promote and grow, right? I want to see a world where war doesn't exist anymore.
Lockheed's employment in Colorado, their employees, and no doubt would say that they profit, or their business is protecting Americans and their interests. But you don't believe that's the case?
I don't believe that's the case, no. If Lockheed wants to continue into other avenues or industries that don't profit off of war, I'd be happy to see that, though.
Two more questions for you.
So I love that she's talking about defense contractors here, quote unquote defense, right? Companies, corporations that have a business model making money off of death profiteers. In Lockheed Martin, she's specifically responding to a question about Palantir leaving Colorado, and she's saying that's a great thing. And I love that she says that those companies, in her mind, can still, if they want to make, I don't know, frying pans, if Lockheed Martin wants to pivot away from weapons of mass destruction and murder into making cooking utensils or laundry baskets or whatever the hell, carpet cleaners, I don't know, I'm trying to think of things I have in the house. They can do that. They're free to do that, and they can make a lot of money that way. They can go on the TikTok shop and sell their shit. But she's saying these companies these death profiteers should not be making weapons of death. They should not be making so many products, quote unquote, that are killing us, that are killing people around the world, and then making money off of it, and then lobbying the government to buy more and more. And that sort of, she's talking about the incentive structure that creates the desire for corporations to be in a perpetual state of endless war. That's the incentive. She's someone who really understands the profit-making motive that exists right now, in dragging us into one war after another. She's saying that she would be I mean, of course, as a freshman Congress member, she's not going to have a lot of power to make that a reality, but at least she brings that background into saying, maybe Lockheed Martin, I believe, should not make weapons. And the reason why I think it's an interesting thing to say, first of all, she said that before she was elected. So I think, and I think that's quite a brave position to stake out. But I also think it's interesting because under the Defense Production Act, which is a legislation that gives the government power to dictate to corporations and companies, including Lockheed Martin, Palantir, all of them, if they're based in the US, it gives them the power, it gives the government power to actually dictate to these companies, hey, we want you to make this. During the COVID era, the Defense Production Act was used to incentivize companies or telling corporations and companies to make masks and ventilators and all of this equipment that hospitals needed. And the United States government also has the power, if there was political will for it, to tell companies like Lockheed Martin, like Northrop Grumman, like all of the defense contractors, the evil companies that we can think of, the United States government actually has the power to say, hey, you should not make bombers or machine guns that fire 100 rounds a minute, or any weapon that can, any weapons. Like, the government can tell you what to make or not make if there was a political will to actually do that. And of course, the incentive structure of making more weapons so that they can be used in more wars, and then more wars make the defense contractors come back to the Pentagon and say, hey, we need more money, or if you want more weapons, you're going to have to give us more money. Like, all of that, it's a cyclical thing that's very hard to get out of, unless someone with, I'll say it again, political will comes in there and says, actually, I'm going to use the power of the government and existing legislation under the Defense Production Act to tell death profiteers that they should make something else if they want to stay in business. And if they don't want to stay in business, go bankrupt. But we're not going to give you any more government contracts. I think that's something that I would really love in the political realm that we live in, and just in the discourse. I would love to see more lefty Congress members or Senate, or if we ever get a lefty senator who's anti-Zionist. Right now, we don't have that. I would love to see more people advocate for that, because I think we don't talk enough about how going back to root causes, how a lot of what has been motivating the United States to get involved in conflicts all over the world and advocate for regime change in every government you can think of, from Latin America to East Asia to West Asia, killing people all over the world, in Indonesia, in Cambodia, in Vietnam. Of course, there's also part of it is to try to kill any socialist government or any threat to corporate interests. But part of those corporate interests are weapons manufacturers or for example, during the Iran-Contra affair, when the United States government was selling weapons to both Iraq and Iran to fight each other, and they were so it was like selling weapons to both sides so they can finance couing the Nicaraguan Sandinista government. Like, so there's the profit incentive structure as a root cause of the wars that we're witnessing and the genocides that we're seeing is very, very, very important. And even though as a freshman Congress member, she's not going to have any power to make that legislation reality, and she's up against all of these Democratic Congress members who take money from defense contractors, and they're not going to sign on to legislation that asks or tells Lockheed Martin to do anything differently. I think we can sort of imagine a world where maybe we have one day an American president who decides that that would be in the United States national interest to stop profiting off of death. I think that's a hopeful thought, perhaps naive on my end. I've been called naive many, many times. All right, so let's play another interview clip that Congressmember Kiros did with MSNBC, friends of the show, just kidding. MSNBC is really going all in on the rebrand. You know, they have new logos. They have, even if you look at their YouTube titles, it's very like, it's it's very aggressive the way independent channels do, where like they put all caps on the verb, like, you know, Congressmember slashes incoming blah blah blah, like, you know, it's very aggressive. They're really trying to pretend to be more like the independent channels that make more money than them. They're really leaning into that. So let's see how this interview went.
You mentioned healthcare, and one of your top policies is Medicare for All, but Diana DeGette is a co-sponsor of the Medicare for All Act in Congress. Are there any dividing lines between the two of you on Medicare for All?
Yeah, the dividing line is how we actually get it done. There is no world where we pass Medicare for all while there is still a majority of members of Congress that are taking money from the very health insurance companies that would effectively be legislated out of existence. It's the same reason why the National Nurses United's policy director also expressed concern for members of Congress that are co-sponsoring this bill while also taking money from big health insurance companies.
This is really, really interesting and so important. Is what she's saying here in the of the National Nurses United flagging this, but this has always been true too, that Congress members are so fucking sneaky, and they literally they literally get away with murder, in some cases literally, which I think I said. But the idea that you could, as a Congress member, like the incumbent representative that she thankfully ousted, that a representative like that could sign on to the Medicare for All bill while also taking money from insurance companies, because they know that they don't actually have to fight to legislate it. They can just sign for it as a co-sponsor and say, hey, I did my job. I did my work. I said, hey, why are you going after me? I signed the Medicare for All bill. Yeah, but did you force to have it be voted on the floor? Did you sign a discharge petition to actually get that legislation to the floor to actually be voted on? Or are you just signed on as a co-sponsor so you can use it to get reelected for 30 years and never actually passing universal healthcare or Medicare for All? I think that's crazy that you can sign on to the Medicare for All bill to sort of make yourself look progressive while literally taking health insurance money. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy, because that keeps that legislation. You can literally paint yourself as progressive while effectively fighting to kill the legislation or keep it on the back burner forever. That's crazy. That's crazy, because then you can have it both ways. You can say, I'm so progressive, while literally not using your power to actually get that legislation to pass. Oh, we'll pass it next time. We'll pass it next time we have a majority. Oh, we'll pass it in in 50 years. We'll pass it when we have another majority. Oh, shucks, we just lost the Senate. So, you know, oh, but hey, I'm a co-sponsor of Medicare for All. It's so gross that people can get away with it. And I love that she's highlighting the difference between signing on as a co-sponsor to a legislation and actually fighting for the legislation to pass. I think one of the ways that Democrats have really failed people, and that's something that I remember very vividly, is how when they had all of this political capital in 2021, they had a House majority, a Senate majority, and the presidency, and they wouldn't even fight for a public option. Instead, they told people, no, you're getting a $1,400 check, and you should be thankful. You should be so fucking grateful. And, you know, just stay in the fight. Help us get another majority in the midterms. and then we'll talk about a $15 wage or a public option. And what happened? Republicans overtook the majority because the pendulum always swings. And then Democrats hid behind, oh, but we're out of power. What the fuck do you want us to do? What we wanted you to do when you had a trifecta is to actually use your power to pass not even Medicare for all, a public option. And they refused to do that. And they told people who were asking for that we were crazy, that we were asking for too much, that we were ungrateful, that we don't understand politics.
And we have to pass Medicare for all. We have to get that done in the next Democratic administration. That's how we MAGA-proof our future. That's how we guarantee that whatever sycophant fills Donald Trump's shoes in 2032 and tries to lay blame on all of our vulnerable communities for why the system is rigged, we can point to a piece of legislation that we passed that meaningfully helped working families. And the only way we get Medicare for all passed is by getting rid of the Democrats that are actively standing in that way, by taking money from the same interests that don't want to see Medicare for all passed.
And I love how she framed it that way, in terms of we have to pass Medicare for all so that so that Democrats actually deserve to keep their majorities. And, like, we have to, I hate using this word because it's so overused now by bad faith, rich corporatist assholes. But delivering for people, she's saying that delivering Medicare for all would actually help Democrats keep more people invested in having Democrats hold power again. And I think, again, to go back to 2021, when Democrats had a trifecta, I think there hasn't been enough of a reckoning from anybody, Congress member, and this is even separate and apart from the genocide, which of course had so much implication in terms of depressing voter turnout and all of these things. But I think the fact that people remember also when Obama had a supermajority in the Senate, not even codifying Roe v. Wade, not even using his political capital to do that, instead just passing Romney Care, which is a healthcare, bill, quote unquote, written by the Heritage Foundation. They wasted all of their political capital on that. So I think for Congressmember Kiros to sort of have the analysis of when and if we get a majority, is we actually have to pass something that we have to pass Medicare for all. And again, she's up against so many powerful forces who don't want to see that happen, who want to punt on Medicare for all. And those health insurance companies know how to use the electoral system to their advantage and let people vent by saying, oh, you can support Medicare for all, you can co-sponsor it. It's just that we're never going to bring that bill to the floor. They've much more than the average, I think, person who might not be intimately familiar with procedural process. Corporations have studied and learned the entire system and how to use it to their advantage. And getting people to sign on to progressive legislation and then shelving it is part of how they led a lot of it's how they let House members who are more progressive. It's how they let them vent their concerns so that they can also campaign on saying, hey, I support a Medicare for all bill. I co-sponsored it. I signed it. Vote for me, to stay in office, and then never passing it, ever. Like in 50 years, the fact that codifying Roe v. Wade was not a priority for neither Obama in 8 years, or which also has a majority of Republican support at this point, the Roe v. Wade legislation I'm talking about. They absolutely, and Urban Biden had a trifecta. They absolutely could have passed it. They just didn't want to. So I think here Congressmember Kiros is also making the case to people who are only invested in Democrats winning, regardless of any policy achievements, which is like people like Ryan Grimm, right? Ryan Grimm is not invested in Democrats actually doing anything except winning the next election. So she's telling these people, hey, if you actually want to win or in her term, MAGA-proof your majorities, you actually it would be in your best interest to pass something like Medicare for All so that people have a reason to vote for you. So very, very compelling framing on her part that I'm not sure the Democratic Party would be receptive to, but nevertheless, very, very effective messaging and strategy and framing on her part. So kudos to her. One more video before we go to Congressmember Kiros' op-ed that had to do with Palestine.
You talked about the money that had flowed into the incumbent Diana DeGette. You know, one thing that I noted, and I've covered her for a long time. She's been in Congress. She voted against the Iraq War. She was a member of the Progressive Caucus. She's not really a conservative Democrat. She's been a pretty progressive Democrat. Look at her voting record. What was it about her record that I think some people, and I think she herself probably looked at and said, "Hey, I'm a pretty progressive member of Congress," that you found so intolerable you wanted to unseat her?
You know, it's not.
And I just want to say, I forgot that Chris Hayes, no offense, Chris, I forgot he existed. And I follow politics to my own detriment. And I forgot. I legitimately forgot. Like, I don't know why that's so shocking to me, but like, really? He still has a show on MSNBC? Is he going to be there forever? Has he been there forever? Has he always been there? Has he been there for 50 years and is he just a permanent fixture of MSNBC and we just don't realize it? Kind of like a mythical creature, you know, like a leprechaun who comes. I don't know, what do leprechauns come? Sorry, I'm trying to remember the mythology of leprechauns. They show up at the end of a rainbow with a pot of gold. They've always existed, right? They're timeless. They're timeless creatures. That's how I feel. I mean, even his haircut hasn't changed in the years that I remember. Like, because I remember him even in 2016 when Bernie was running, and 2020. So it's been like at least 10 years, and he looks exactly the same. Maybe we should ask for a skin regimen, or I'm kind of alarmed, I think, that he's still around and he's still not making any substantive points. Kind of just always doing the exact same thing. Anyway, I don't know if anyone else forgot, but anyway.
Not the Congresswoman herself. It's the campaign finance system that has incentivized members of Congress like Diana DeGette to take millions of dollars from Big Pharma, Big Energy and Oil, defense contractors. At the end of the day, the reason why we are not seeing legislation like Medicare for All and universal childcare and an arms embargo on Israel pass, despite a super majority of support from the voters of this party, is because when corporations and special interests donate to campaigns, it's not that they're going to get an immediate return with legislation that is favored for them. Sometimes the return that they get is stalling on legislation that would actually make a meaningful difference for families. And so at the end of the day, the only way we can trust that the Congress members are actually fighting for that kind of legislation is to not be taking money from the very corporations and special interests that do not want to see that kind of legislation from passing. In fact, the National Nurses United Policy Director said as much about the Congresswoman's co-sponsorship of Medicare for All while also taking money from the very health insurance companies that would be legislated out of existence. We can't trust that kind of donations coming in for Congress members isn't going to result in some kind of return. And sometimes that return is that we're not actually going to get anything done.
Very well said. Very well said. It's very interesting that the Democratic Party now has to reckon with freshman members like Congressmember Kiros and Congressmember Avila Chevalier, whether that would actually result in the Democratic Party changing substantively any of its triangulation ways, you know, in terms of saying, we hear you, we hear you, we hear you. You're worried about healthcare, blah, blah, blah. Let's triangulate this into passing more COBRA subsidies. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. So this is an op-ed that Congressmember Kiros wrote on November 7th, 2023, a month into the genocide. that I think is really worth a read. And this is an op-ed that has caused that the law firm that she was working at the time asked her, Congressmember Kiros, to delete this article, which is posted on Medium. It's not even like a big publication or anything. You would think they asked her to remove it from the Washington Post or whatever like an outlet with I guess like mainstream recognition behind it. It was just a post on Medium that she posted, and they told her that she would be fired unless she took this post down, and she refused to delete it. So she was fired, and now she's in Congress. So let's read it together. And she does bring up the one-state solution towards the end. So this is very, I guess, on theme for this channel, on brand. I hate that term, on brand. Okay. Dear U.S. law firms. And she was writing this again while working at the law firm that she was working at. Beginning on November 1st, 2023, numerous U.S. law firms, including my own, signed a letter. This letter rightfully rebukes the anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and bigotry of all kinds that has spiked in recent weeks, but then goes on, to my confusion, to cite calls for the elimination of the Israeli state as anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has fittingly been called the longest hatred. It has been so for thousands of years and has led to the death and suffering of millions of Jewish people around the world. To conflate such bigotry with the geopolitical question of Israel's legitimacy is one of the greatest travesties in this conflict. While the letter makes no explicit threats against one's potential employment with the signatories' firms, the chilling effect is undeniable. The right to question not only the legitimacy of a government, but also its actions is the bedrock principle of a true democracy. And despite claiming to be the one and only democracy in the Middle East, the Israeli government has weaponized anti-Semitism to defend its crimes against the Palestinian people and quell any resistance or critique against it. Take, for example, the accusation of apartheid. Israel has been accused of committing the crime of apartheid for decades, even as early as 1961, when South African Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd scoffed at Israel's vote against his own government's apartheid, for they took Israel away from the Arabs after the Arabs lived there for 1,000 years. In that, I agree with them. Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state, unquote. The United Nations Human Rights Watch, the Human Sciences Research Council of South Africa, Yesh Din, B'Tselem, the International Federation for Human Rights, Amnesty International, the International Commission of Jurists, and former President Jimmy Carter have all accused the State of Israel of apartheid against the Palestinian people. NGOs, activists, and politicians have leveled this allegation against the Israeli government, but to no avail. Instead, the Israeli government claims these conclusions are false, biased, and anti-Semitic. There are deep historical and religious wounds that plague this conflict and cloud our ability to judge it clearly, but there are also irrefutable truths. Historic Palestine was promised by a brutalizing imperial power for purposes motivated by their own anti-Semitism, to a minority of Jewish people who subscribe to Zionism with no consideration given to the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who already live there. This was, by globally recognized definitions, colonialism. Colonialism, as we so intimately know, cannot take place without violence against its indigenous people. Instead of acknowledging their plight as a direct result of Israel's occupation, scores of excuses, attempts to discredit the indigeneity of the Palestinians and the existence of Palestine itself, as if to excuse the horrific violence they have endured at the hands of the Israeli government and its settlers since 1917, the kind of violence that corrupts the soul, as Ta-Nehisi Coates put it. So I think it's very interesting. So she clearly understands that the struggle for Palestinian liberation is rooted in anti-colonial theory, and it's an anti-colonial struggle, and that, and she even goes on to mention that the historical roots of Zionism were anti-Semitic in nature. I mean, Theodor Herzl was an atheist, but he was appealing to anti-Semites, like Lord Balfour, who was very anti-Semitic, the British Lord who wrote the Balfour Declaration. You know, she's very much taking, I think, a very, I don't want to say nuanced, but it's a very true historical fact that anti-Semitism gave rise to the Zionist movement on purpose, and has then weaponized anti-Semitism to defend itself from accusations of apartheid. She's very knowledgeable about this, and the fact that she published this op-ed a month into the genocide on November 7th, 2023, I think is commendable. And the fact that she refused to take it down and keep her cushy jobs at the law firm is very commendable. I like her. I'm sorry. I hate the Democratic Party as a whole, but I like her. Against my, I know, and I'm not saying to anybody who might be watching this and is a hopeless cynic like I am, I'm not saying to have faith that the Democratic Party is changing. I think it's going to take more than a few freshman House members. Unfortunately, it's going to take at least, I think it's going to take at least 50 anti-Zionist House members and 20 anti-Zionist senators to actually create the conditions for the Democratic Party to deliver on the things we want, and not just rhetoric. But the fact that a person like with this analysis is in Congress, I like it. I like it a lot. I like you, Congressmember Kiros. I do. Let's keep reading, because she brings up the one-state solution to my great joy. So let's keep reading. Violence corrupts the soul, and it does so by breeding more violence. There has never been in the history of the entire human race a people whose land was violently taken from them, whose freedoms and rights were relegated to second-class citizenship, and whose very existence was systematically threatened by its occupier, who did not resist with violence in kind. And yet, acknowledging the seemingly obvious symptom of violent resistance to violent colonialism has led to the loss of employment and freedom to numerous individuals, particularly in places that claim to value freedom of speech. I can find no words that better describe the cyclical nature of colonialist violence than that of the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, paraphrased by Professor Nourit Peled El-Hanan, a lecturer at the David Yellen College of Education in Jerusalem, in a faculty WhatsApp group chat discussing the October 7th attacks. After so many years that the neck of the occupied has been suffocating under your iron foot and suddenly was given a chance to raise his eyes, what kind of gaze did you expect you would see there? We saw this gaze. Hours later, Ms. Peled El-Hanan was suspended for expressing, quote, justification to the heinous act. A study in 2010 found that the New York Times covered Israeli deaths and Palestinian deaths at a ratio of 25-1. Today, coverage of the conflict continues this pattern. Palestinians, quote-unquote, die, while Israelis are, quote-unquote, killed. Acts of Palestinian resistance are labeled terrorism, while acts of Israeli settler violence are called vigilantism, the very same settler violence responsible for the over 133 Palestinians murdered and 1,800 arbitrarily arrested in the West Bank since the October 7th attacks near Gaza. Hamas operates exclusively in Gaza, so what justification could there possibly be for such violence? There are none, not now, not ever. And yet, the government of Israel attempts to by claiming quote-unquote self-defense and quote-unquote security concerns, terms that are meant to disguise the innocence of the Palestinians being victimized by their violence. Just as we all have a great capacity for tolerance and kindness, so too is our capacity for oppression and cruelty. Our only hope of creating a world where this kind of violence and oppression no longer exists requires us to acknowledge any and all injustice wherever it festers, and reject it in the fiercest terms. Hateful attacks and acts of intimidation have sharply risen against American Jews, regardless of their political ideology and whether they subscribe to Zionism. Hateful attacks and acts of intimidation have also sharply risen against American Muslims, regardless of their national origin. Hateful attacks and acts of intimidation have also sharply risen against American Sikhs, a community far removed from this conflict. All of these hate crimes stem from the same deeply misguided belief that we must answer for the actions of those who share our race, religion, nationality, ethnicity, and so on and so on. While the letter that over 100 US law firms and counting have signed condemned the bigotry of all kinds, it only calls out specific examples of anti-Semitism, begging the question, do you consider some acts of hate against one group to be worse than another? By chilling future lawyers' employment prospects for criticism of the Israeli government's actions and its legitimacy, you are complicit in Israel's weaponization of anti-Semitism against legitimate concerns for the right of self-determination and the livelihood of the Palestinian people. By conflating, quote, calls for the elimination of the Israeli state with anti-Semitism, you delegitimize any solution that forces Israel to reckon with its colonial role in Palestine, including one-state solutions called for by Palestinians and Israelis alike. One state under the historic Palestine, where all citizens are equal under the rule of law, regardless of religion or ethnicity. And she links here this page, which is from the One State campaign, onestate.org. Check this out. Palestinians and Israelis call for one democratic state. And you can visit their website at onestatecampaign.org. All right. Let's go back to this tab. It's great that she's aware of the One State campaign too. As stated by Palestinian lawyer Michael Tarasi, support for one state is hardly a radical idea. It is simply the recognition of the uncomfortable reality that Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories already function as a single state. They share the same aquifers, the same highway network, the same electricity grid, and the same international borders. The one-state solution neither destroys the Jewish character of the Holy Land nor negates the Jewish historical and religious attachment, although it would destroy the superior status of Jews in that state. Rather, it affirms that the Holy Land has an equal Christian and Muslim character. For those who believe in equality, this is a good thing. Perhaps it is naive to believe that the people in Palestine and Israel might one day live together as neighbors in peace without fear of persecution under a new government, but it is not hopeless, and most importantly, it is not anti-Semitic. I sincerely hope you take my words in the earnest spirit I am giving them and reconsider your signatures on this letter by recognizing that there is no path toward peace if we do not allow the legitimacy of governments and institutions around the globe to be questioned and criticized, regardless of where they are or who they serve. So in this letter, she's defending the right of other lawyers like herself at the time in law firms. She's defending their right to question the legitimacy of the apartheid state, not just questioning the apartheid nature in the West Bank and Gaza, but questioning the legitimacy of Israel in total. And she's specifically citing the one-state solution. And the Palestinian lawyer, Michael Tarisi, sort of explain why advocating for one equal state is not anti-Semitic. And she stood by that conviction, so much so that she refused to delete this op-ed. They told her at her law firm that she had to take it down if she wanted to keep her job, and she refused. This is someone with conviction. This is someone who understands the root causes of the genocide in Palestine. And I believe that this is someone who would be on the side of my president, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, when she introduces the One State Solution Act or the Anti-Apartheid Act for Palestine. I think this is someone who, I think for her to have quoted the One State Solution campaign, being familiar with it, being familiar with Michael Tarisi's writings about the One State Solution, I think this is very positive. So, Congressmember Kiros, I know it's past your primary. But I guess for the general election, even though you're in a deep blue district, you don't need this from me, but you are getting right now, right here, the neoliberal tears endorsement. Congratulations. Congratulations. You have passed my litmus test. How does it feel? Oh my God, you should be so happy. And I mean, I'm sure it makes you even happier than winning your congressional race, which again was well deserved, and congratulations. I hope that you stay true to your commitments and your convictions and your values, because every pressure point is going to come after you from the left, from the right, from up, from down, from all sorts of places, to prove that you're not so crazy and radical and communisty and all of these things, because they want to moderate you. They want to neutralize you. They want to shave off the edges. They want to make sure you become just another corporate Democrat who signs on to a Medicare for all legislation without fighting for it, like the incumbent you ousted and who deserved to be ousted. They want to make sure you don't actually fight for the things you believe in. You're not radical. People are where you are. And equality from the river to the sea is not a fucking radical idea. And the more people are exposed to the one-state solution, and when they hear about the one-state solution, because the mainstream media blacklists and refuses to talk about Palestine in those terms, and the solution for Palestine in those terms, that's why they try to scare every person who has ever held office in the United States into saying, well, you want to be looked at as the pragmatist and the moderate voice and a realist and all those things, you have to support a two-state solution, or else you're crazy. I think equality is not crazy, and I wish we have more Congress members like you to join my president, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, because I feel bad for her that she's right now the only member of Congress who defends the one-state solution in the press. She did so on Democracy Now! And sort of explaining her rationale for supporting the one-state solution. She needs your support. She needs your solidarity. So I hope as a freshman Congress member that you use your platform as an elected representative who gets invited to networks like CNN and MSNBC and newsrooms that are not open to anti-Zionists in general. I hope you use your platform to explain why being anti-Zionist is the moral position, and why supporting one equal state we should all be anti-Zionists. I gave the same advice to Congressmember Avila Chevalier. I hope you both take it on. I hope you tag team each other. I don't know if that's the term I want to use, actually. I hope you support each other. I hope we get all of Congress to understand why the one-state solution and equal rights from the river to the sea is the world and the just solution for Palestinians, as well as the right return of all Palestinian refugees and their descendants. Why that's part of the world that we want to build, a fair and a just, equal world that we should be fighting for. And thank you for standing up for those values, for the right to question the legitimacy of an apartheid state, whether it should exist or not exist. Thank you for standing up for that and defending that in an op-ed, despite the fact that it cost you your livelihood. I'm so grateful to you for standing on business, as Justin Bieber likes to say. Thank you. Thank you. And please normalize talking about the one-state solution, because we need exposure. We need people who are elected representatives to introduce it to people who may have never heard about it before. The average American voter has never, and because of the efforts of the media apparatus and the Israeli lobby and the defense contractor lobby and a lot of lobbies, they don't want to ever bring it up as a possibility. But you have power now. They're not going to give you committee assignments that are worth anything as a freshman Congress member, and especially they're going to use the fact the media being so adversarial to leftists and progressives in general. They're going to use it as their excuse to not give you any meaningful political committee assignments. But your power to influence the discourse in the media and being invited to give interviews on mainstream news channels should not. It's a massive bully pulpit if you choose to use it and to advocate in the same manner that you so compellingly argue for Medicare for all and what the urgent need for it and why we don't have time to wait for, you know, for the co-sponsor list to go from 115 to 116, to force the conversation. You have the power to do that. And again, thank you for standing on business, as my bestie Justin Bieber likes to say. I think, and for anyone who might be watching this, just to keep our perspective in check. In 2018, Democrats retook the House from Republicans. They won a House majority. Republicans still retained control of the Senate. So we might be living in a world next year where Democrats hold the House majority again under a Trump presidency and Republican Senate. And we're going to see a lot of push, as we did in 2019, for Democrats are going to say all the right things, right? Kamala Harris, at the time when she was in the Senate in 2019, she sponsored the Medicare for All bill. She did a whole thing, like she did a whole media blitz of, like, you know, showing videos of people who have been affected by the health insurance scam of a system that we have, and sort of saying, I support Medicare for all. And then a year later, she became vice president, and we never heard about it again when Democrats had a trifecta. So really what it comes down to is not what Democrats say when they're out of power or out of without a Senate majority or without the presidency. It's what they actually do when they have a trifecta. And I think that's why I think the Democratic Party is going to be very resistant to delivering on the things we need and deserve. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I guess we'll find out. Congressmember Kiros, thank you again for being so well versed on this issue, unlike 99% of Congress. And I hope you resist the pressure by all of the moderate factions, quote unquote moderate, and the right-wing factions and the corporate factions of the Democratic Party to silence and sideline and minimize you and other members who actually believe in not just giving lip service to legislation and bills, but actually fighting to put them on the floor and delivering on it. I hope you resist all of those pressures and stay true to who you are. And thank you. So that's all I had, guys. If you're catching this later, thank you. Thank you for joining me. I'd love to know what you think. Do you have hope now in the Democratic Party? Can it be reformed from within? Let me know. Let me know how you feel. I see a lot of optimism, just from my perception of things. I see a lot of optimism, even from people who have been disenchanted, like myself, by the Democratic Party. I see a lot of cautious optimism, and I see a lot of people who kind of say, yeah, it's like I saw someone say, I already like Congressmember Kiros and Congressmember Avila Chevalier. We already like them more than AOC, because AOC has a voting record and it sucks. We know what she's like. We've seen how AOC behaves when Democrats have a trifecta, and how she refuses to fight for anything that might complicate her relationships in the House, for example. So I see a lot of optimism in terms of hoping and believing that those freshman representatives that are coming in, this new crop of legislators, that they will be different. And I share some of that optimism. But I think for the Democratic Party to meet those members who are well-intentioned, I believe, to meet them where they are and where people are, I think it's going to take, unfortunately, also more than a few House members, sadly. Like, I think AOC was on the record saying that Hakeem Jeffries should not be primaried back when there was a chance to primary him for this cycle. So Hakeem Jeffries, even in the Democratic House majority, would retain his leadership position. And we know where he stands when it comes to taking corporate PAC money. So I think there are going to be many obstacles, even to the most well-meaning. Even if I was somehow in Congress, like there would, it would be impossible for me to pass the kind of legislation that would make Democrats more electable. Which is why I think using their media training and rallying the bully pulpit and educating people when they go on interviews on MSNBC and CNN and all of these things, I think is where their power truly lies, especially with Democrats being out of power for the foreseeable future, at least until after 2028. So we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. I won't count my horses just yet. Is that a saying? Counting horses? Or counting sheep? I won't count my fruits too soon. I don't know. You can complete my thought process. You can. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I keep thinking the people who might be watching this. To the few of you who tune in, I hope that this was useful. And let me know what you think. And I'll see you next time. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. From the river to the sea.
Oh